Creating mosaic jewellery has become quite popular in recent years, and with so many options available to you, I can fully understand why. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how to create this beautiful mosaic heart necklace, and I'm going to show you that right now. Now, there's a lot of bezels out in the marketplace, but not all of them are deep, and some of them are fairly average in quality. But these particular ones are very good quality and they are deep, which means that you can be a bit more creative with them. And also you can use thicker material because there's enough room in there for the adhesive as well as a thicker material. So I find these are really, really good to use. And when I do create a necklace, I want to make sure that the actual tessera is flush with the top of the bezel. I really don't want to have the tessera higher than the edge or higher than the wall of the bezel. I think it looks much neater and better finished if it's flush with the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to create this necklace and I'll show you the materials that I use to create it. Okay, some of the products I'm going to be using. Gloves. You need to wear protective gloves because the adhesive I'm going to be using is going to be Aves Epoxy Sculpt Part A and Part B, and you need to wear gloves. I know there are people out there that don't wear gloves when using Epoxy Sculpt or Magic Sculpt or any of those other two-part epoxy type products. However, it is very, very wise to wear gloves at all times, not just when you're mixing it, but when you're actually applying it, smoothing it out or whatever you might be doing with it. Wear gloves at all times and in a well-ventilated room. I cannot stress that enough. You're going to need a bezel. Crockery I'm using, but you could be using something else. I'm using porcelain crockery, and the reason why I'm using porcelain is because it's reasonably thin, but also when I nip it, it nips really, really well. You get a very nice cut. Also a marker and double-wheeled nippers, and of course there'll be other things along the way, but this is the bulk of what I'm going to be using. So anyway, let's get into it and we'll mix the epoxy sculpt. When it comes to mixing epoxy sculpt, you need equal parts of A and equal parts of B. Now I know some people do use scales and they mix it up very accurately. For me, I tend to eye it. I mix up a little ball of A and put it in that hand, a little ball of B and put it in that same hand. I look at it and I go, yes, that's about right. I have fairly good eyes for accuracy. Well, I like to think so anyway. But I mix it up by eye, and I always mix up just small batches. In this particular case, I may mix up the whole bezel, but if I'm doing a larger project, then I only mix up small batches because you only have really so much time to work with epoxy sculpt. It can still feel sticky, but it can actually lose its stickiness, if that makes sense. So it's better to mix up small batches and keep it fresh than rather think, oh, that still feels sticky. You stick the piece down in it and it doesn't hold as well as it should. So small batches is key. Sometimes I do mix a little bit much, and this is probably going to be one of those times. I just mix it like that, put it on that lid, take that one off. Look at it. No, it's going to need a bit more. It's got a bit much. Yep, that's pretty good. And then I mix those together and I put the lid straight back on. Because you don't want to leave the lids off. Then I just get there and mix it until all the marbling, see all that marbling, is completely gone. And this will be more than enough for that bezel. I mean, you can, if you find that you need a little bit more, then you're better off mixing a little bit more than having a big batch of it and then finding that you're going to throw a lot of it away. That's just a waste. So you just keep mixing it until you get all that marbling to all blend in to the grey. Okay, get our bezel. We'll pop that in there. And I'm really looking at just creating a little bit of a base, round about probably 1 mil thick. And in some case you might have to dig some out, in some case you might have to put more in because your crockery could be different thicknesses, which if it is, it's not a problem. but you know, you want to just be aware that you might not get it all in one go. I'm just getting my little tool and I've lost it. That's okay, I'll just keep using this. I'm just making sure it's getting into the edges. And you know, everyone does these differently. This is just how I do it. And I'm not saying it's the only way. It's just the way that I find works really well for me. Okay. See, I mixed up a little bit much, but that's okay. We'll just put that aside. Now, the crockery is kept in bags, and I just think what I'm going to use, I will probably end up and use these. And these ones I'm thinking it's really, this is the fun part, it's really a matter of playing around until you, and I mean you may put a piece in and then find, no, I don't want to use that piece and change it. So what I'm thinking maybe is these really add a nice fill. So I might end up and bring it in from the side like that. And that one in from that side, and maybe do the flowers below, something of that nature. But like I said, we can change it. So now the other thing too is before, if you find you aren't going to use, for instance, you're only going to use a part of this and you're not going to get to use the rest of it today or within the time you know, of 20 minutes or so, scrape it out and put a new batch in there when you are ready to use. Don't leave it in there because it hardens like rock and you will never get it out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a kind of like a focal piece on the bottom. So I'm thinking maybe this or maybe this one. And then those coming up from the side. No, I'll do the flower. I'll do that one. The one I was originally going to do. All right, so we're going to now place him on top. And we're going to now just go around the outside. We're going to go around the outside with this texture. And you probably can't see this because my hands are going to be in the way. Okay, now we'll cut him out. See how well it nips when you're using porcelain? You get this really nice edge on it. Actually, we'll take that off there. That's better. Don't forget your safety glasses. I should have mentioned those earlier. Now I'm going to, I may end up and do some grinding with this stained glass grinder, but I'm going to try and avoid grouting. I like my joints to be, in my mosaics, I like my joints to be very tight, so as I don't need to grout. Okay, so we're going to now see how that fits. Yep, that looks pretty good. We're going to take that edge off there, and that edge off there. Now, why am I taking those edges off? Well, because I want it to be more of a mosaic. So I'm looking at, and I don't want the gold in it, but you can have the gold if you want it. I'm going to take that little edge off there. That's better. Okay, so it's coming up all right, but I will grind it. Now you can use sandpaper or a file if you wanted to get that edge to be perfect. I'm going to use a stained glass grinder. So that's what I'm going to be using. But if you are going to be using a file or sandpaper, make sure you wear an N95 or a P2 mask because you don't want to breathe in that silica dust from grinding it. But the stained glass grinder is a wet grinder, so that's fine. There you go. Now, of course, if I wanted to grout, then I wouldn't have to be as accurate with my joins here. So just remember that if you're grouting, you don't have to be as accurate. But because I'm trying to avoid grouting, I want the joins to be really, really accurate. So now that we've got that and it's slightly high there, as you can see, it's slightly high, I'm now going to just push that in. And now what we've got is that is now smooth. And we're just going to jiggle that into a better position. There you go. And then when it comes to this edge there, we're just going to squash that epoxy sculpt down there. That's it. So that's our first piece. And then, of course, you take it from there and see where you want to take it to. So now I'm thinking, I've got that. I'm thinking now I can add anything else to this actually. If I wanted to, I could take that piece there and bring it up around the top. So it curves up around into that lower part of the heart, which will also work quite well. But I'm thinking about, because there's a bit of blue in there, I'm thinking about creating that into that area there. Or I could even bring it off to the side like that. So you work with what's going to look best, and also I'm really looking at the flowers there being in there. I don't want to cut these flowers off and just have this green stem. I mean, you can do that if it's going to add to the piece, but in this particular case, I really want to use those flowers. So I'm thinking about maybe adding it into something like that. So in that particular case, we're going to now approximately do that. And I mean, you can make this as intricate as possible, but because I am trying to make a fairly quick video, I'm using fairly large pieces, but you can use a lot smaller pieces and take a day on it if you want, or 2 days on it. But I really am looking at just trying to speed the video up a bit here. And then we cut those off because we can use those later for something else. And now I just cut into the line. And that should work quite well. I'm going to now have to because that's in there, I'm going to now have to it's better that you get one area right first before you just cut all over the place and thinking it's right, because what you'll end up with is you'll end up with big gaps because you haven't got any of it right. So I generally just get an idea with that line there, but I'm really concentrating on getting this area right up here so it snuggles in and fits well, because because this has got a curve in it, I'm going to have to put a cut through there so it flattens down. I mean, I may not, but I think I will have to because that will look quite effective actually if it did leave that curve in there, but it will sit higher and prouder, and it may, and I don't want people, if they're handling this, to actually hit the hand against that edge there. So I'm going to actually now just take that bit of an edge off up there. Okay, what I'm going to do now is actually put a cut through that center there so as I can flatten that down. And this is why I like to use porcelain, because it cuts so well. And then this piece will go back in here. So now I'm going to have to get that, now I've got that in two pieces, I'm going to have to get that curve to be right. But I think what I'll do, that's partially right, I'll flatten that out now. So that butts up and then I'll do the curve. Okay, I'll just grind that bit down. That piece in there. So now we've got these lines here looking really, really good. So we can actually, if we were to push this down, see how that's not quite connecting in there. So, you know, it leaves this little gap here. So I'm going to just take this gap, this line, just back a bit further so it works in with this line here. And then we can concentrate on the top bit. So I'll take that off now. And I'm looking at just a fraction. I might be able to do that with these. Yes, that's it there. So now that join looks really, really good. I'm really happy with this join because the important thing is if this join had have stayed out here, I would have had this tiny little gap in the center. And I want to make sure that the next piece or the next couple of pieces will sit firmly against these lines. Because to me, that's going to be very, very important if I'm going to keep my lines close like this one here and these ones here. So now what I'm going to do is I've got this corner piece, this next piece up here, and that's almost there, but I need to just smooth that edge there because it's slightly undulating and I want that to be also flat. Like I say, you can do it with a file, but I'm going to use the glass grinder because I find that's reasonably quick, but you have to be very, very careful you don't take off too much. Like I said earlier, if I was grouting this, it wouldn't be an issue. You could just leave that and the grout would fill it. But because I'm trying to avoid grouting, not because I don't want to, but I just think the piece can look really better without the grout in the piece I'm creating anyway. And I've seen some lovely pieces that are grouted, so it's not that all grout is bad. It's just in my particular cases, I like to not grout. So anyway, I'll just take that bit off and I'll be back. We'll see how we go now. So I can push that in now because that's now actually completed. So we just push that firmly in, keeping it right to those edges, and we want those lines to be really, really tight. And also smooth on top. So as you can see, those lines now are very, very good, and it's very, very smooth. It's looking great. Now, what we'll do next is this piece here. I've got that approximately right, but it needs to have a little bit off the top here. Now, really, to be quite honest, I was hoping that this piece was going to join right here. That's what I was aiming for. It would have been better if it did, but you know, when you're doing something like this and it's not going quite as what you thought it would, that's fine. It's just now how you get out of it. So I will make sure that when I create another piece, it will come in on an angle like that or something to that effect, because if that had have butted up there, it would have looked really perfect, but it's not meant to be. And no one else really knows that except for the person that's doing it. So now I'm going to take that edge off. Again, I'll use these, and I'm nipping to the outside of the line because I really don't want to take too much off, because it'll be very easy to take more off, but of course you can't put it back on. Okay, now I'm going to do is just grind that a little bit down. Yep, that's pretty good. So now we can push this in. And again, we want the lines to be tight, and we also want it flush with the top, like that. That's looking really, really good. Hope you can see that. Now, we've got a little bit much epoxy sculpt in here, so we're going to now just move a little bit of that away. And it must be smooth. That almost fits in that crack there, which is really good. So if I straighten that now, if I get there and I straighten this piece here and fix that up, that will fit in that crack. So what I'm going to do is just approximately, that's the angle that that other piece is on. I'm just going to cut that there, just approximately, because, and all these little pieces, we keep these, all those little pieces, we just keep those. Okay, so I'm now just going to straighten that up. Put this in, so that's better. But is it going to be really, really right? Grab one of these baby wipes to wipe off the texture, so as I can see what I'm doing. That's better. And this will also get rid of any residue from the epoxy sculpt. This is really, I usually just use water, but I just happen to have these handy. There you go. So that's getting there. Now, what we'll do is the next bit. So we'll get those edges right. Oh, that's better. This piece was such a pain to do. There you go. And of course, like I said, when you're doing this and you've got a curve here, if I was just to put that in there, there would be a gap there. So it's very, very important to go past that curve, because you really do need, and then you've got to roughly cut it, because you really do want any gaps filled, as I said before. So this is just kind of like roughly cutting it. Okay, that now fits perfectly. Now, there is a problem. The epoxy sculpt will have gone off. So we need to dig this bit out, because this piece was causing me so much hassle that this epoxy sculpt needs to be cleared out and a new small batch made, because it will have lost its stickiness. It's too firm. So I need to make another little batch, and then we'll put that piece back in. Put this piece in. And it's attention to detail. You know, making sure that when you're doing small things like these is that it's kept clean. And any tiny little holes, just fill up with a little bit of epoxy sculpt, because you won't see it, but it will cover that hole up. Because there is a slight hole there, it wasn't anything major, but I really don't want a hole there. There's one there as well. Just ever so small, but I would just prefer it not to be there at all. So it's kind of like cheating because you're not grouting it, but it just means it looks a lot more seamless. And of course this is going to have epoxy sculpt residue over it, so we need to wipe this down. What we don't want to do is get on the phone or on the internet and then find that you've got epoxy sculpt residue on it and you come back and it's hard as a rock. You'll never get it off. It just makes it look like it really fits beautifully. So now what I'll do is I'll now wipe all this over. And clean it right up. And all I'm doing is now just pushing that into some of the cracks that, you know, were just a slightly uneven. Not that anyone would have noticed it, but I did. So I'm really doing it for my benefit, if that makes sense. Okay. Take the time to wipe it down and double check everything. Well, there you go. I think the piece has turned out really, really good, and I've enjoyed using the deep bezel. And like I said, there are shallow bezels in the marketplace. I prefer the deeper ones because I think that they offer more creativity and there's more that you can do with them. But that's their personal preferences. All I've done is I've added a silver chain to this because it matches the bezel beautifully. But if you wanted to, you could also instead of the chain, use a leather bound necklace in place of it. And these leather ones come in different colors, so it allows you to mix and match or do whatever you like with them. Now, if you're looking for a cost-effective present, then these do make a great present. And like I said, you can change if you didn't want to use crockery, you could put anything in them, as I mentioned earlier. So anyway, I hope you've taken something away from this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have any comments, put them down in the comments section and I'll see you in the next video. Enjoy.